So our first paper today is a joint presentation by Dr. David Clare and Dr. Fergal Whelan. Dr. David Clare is a lecturer in drama and theatre studies at Mary Immaculate College, University of Limerick. His books include the monographs Bernard Shaw's Irish Outlook with Palgrave, Irish Anglican Literature and Drama, Hybridity and Discord, which is forthcoming in 2021, again with Palgrave, and then edited collections, The Gate Theatre, Dublin Inspiration and Craft, and The Golden Thread, Irishwomen Playwrights, which is in 2 volumes and is forthcoming from Liverpool University Press. He's published articles and book chapters that have discussed Gate productions of plays by George Farquhar, Oliver Goldsmith, Mary Manning, Christy Longford, Maura Laverty, and Mark O'Rowe. He's a busy man. Dr. Clare is also the curator of www.classicirishplays.com, which is a wonderful database that people should check out. Which was created during an IRC-funded postdoctoral fellowship undertaken at NUI Galway. Fergal Whelan, who will be presenting with David, is a postdoctoral research associate at the Trinity Centre for Beckett Studies at TCD. He's published and presented widely on Beckett on 20th century Irish drama as well. He's a co-director of Samuel Beckett's Summer School at Trinity College Dublin. He's a regular contributor with Mouth on Fire Theatre Company and its annual Beckett in Fox Rock performances. Book chapters are included in Staging Beckett in Ireland and Northern Ireland, Beckett and Modernism, The Gate Theatre, Dublin Inspiration and Craft, Beckett and Politics, Beckett and Technology, The Golden Thread, Irishwomen Playwrights, and A Stage of Emancipation, Change and Progress at the Dublin Gate Theatre, as well as articles in Studios Irlandais and a Journal of Beckett Studies. He's the editor, indeed, of Beckett Circle. And these 2 very accomplished people are going to today present to us, their title of their paper is The Use of Minority Languages at Dublin's Gate Theatre and Barcelona's, and I'm probably going to murder this, Teatre, Lliure, sorry about that, but I'm sure Fergal will put me right on that in a minute. So I'll pass over to you now, Fergal. Thanks a million.
Thanks a million, Ian. Just getting organized here. Okay. Yeah, thanks a million, Ian, and thanks a million to everybody in NUIG for organising this wonderful conference. Unfortunately, I'd love to be in Galway, even in the rain, to be sharing with this with everybody. But it's so nice to see so many people together in one place. Now, I'll just go ahead with, David will take over and really talk about the Gate. I'll talk about Teatre Lliure in Barcelona first. Barcelona's Teatre Lliure and the Gate share many points of comparison. Both are known as practitioners' theatres. Both have struggled to understand whether embodying an alternative national theatre is necessarily undermined by accepting a state subsidy. Both have benefited from the central involvement of female, LGBT and migrant theatre makers. Furthermore, both took Bertolt Brecht as a model as key points in their history, and both have used a combination of international plays and original homegrown dramas to address changing political circumstances in the regions in which they're based. An issue related to the last point is the main focus here of our presentation this morning. We want to argue that the fundamental use of Catalan translation of international drama parallels the key role played by Irish language drama in the early Gate. We demonstrate that the cosmopolitan transnational character of both theatres was not undermined, but actually strengthened by their use of the local language. As Maddie Janssens and Chris Steyert have shown, embracing cosmopolitanism and deciding to use a local language are not contradictory impulses. They contend that when it comes to, quote, language issues in a global context, universality and particularity are inevitably intertwined because, quote, we can only understand the global through the local, and simultaneously in our globalized world, there is no local which is not global. Janssens and Steyert show that the limitations of promoting one lingua franca as the best communication vehicle in a cosmopolitan world, and alternatively encouraging multilingualism, while also unreflectively treating languages as discrete and hermetically sealed units. Building on the work of Ulrich Beck and Nathan Schneiser, these scholars convincingly argue that the true cosmopolitanism involves, quote, being part of the world and at the same time being part of a particular locally and historically grounded place of situation. And this is where we situate the Gate and Lliure. The founders of both the Teatre, Lliure and the Gate, we argue, exhibited true cosmopolitanism when they repeatedly translated works from the wider world into a local minority language. Specifically, in addressing the Catalan audiences with stories that might be relevant to them, the Teatre Lliure has always translated works from across the world into Catalan, as opposed to focusing primarily on works written originally in Catalan or in Spanish. Similarly, the Irish language productions mounted by Corporaal, the Irish language company hosted in the Gate on Sunday nights between 1931 and 42, came from a wide array of sources, and Michael Hession gave us a very good overview of the Cor's work yesterday. Micheál Mac Liammóir directed plays for Encore during those years that were originally written by playwrights from France, Spain, Russia, the United Kingdom, the USA. By examining key examples of international plays translated into the local minority language at both theatres, we want to show that Lliure and the Gate were in fact highlighting local political affairs rather than encouraging their patrons to escape into another socio-political reality. The growth of Catalan nationalism, culminating in the region's short-lived independence before the Spanish Civil War of 36 to 39, bears a resemblance to the development of Irish nationalism in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Catalonia experienced an artistic renaissance in the mid-19th century, which had at its core the promotion of literature and in Catalan, designed to rejuvenate the declining language and setting the tone for politicization of the language in the following years, granting it a central role in following the foundation of an autonomous government within the Spanish Republic in 1932. The victory of General Franco's coup and the subsequent civil war in 1939 eliminated the independent Catalonia, assuming the region back into a unified Spain. Although the Catalan language theatre persisted under the regime, it's described as being essentially commercial and populist and melodramatic, although there were some slightly more political works in the late 1960s. In the aftermath of Franco's death in 1975, the theatre began to perform a central role in the move towards greater linguistic, artistic, and regional Catalan autonomy. The impulse of this project is discernible through the eagerness of administrative bodies and new administrative bodies to heavily subsidized individual Catalan theatre projects through the new democratic political institutions at various administrative levels, from the state, the autonomous economy, community, and the province, right down to local town council level. Now, the privileging of cultural output in order to promote separateness strongly mirrors the aftermath of independence in Ireland in 1922. The process of building a singular and refined or distilled Irish identity post-independence is marked by the proliferation of public cultural events, such as the public pageants in which the Gate was centrally involved, and of course, which Joan Dean has written brilliantly about. These broad manifestations of nationalism combined a mixture of tradition and legend with modern modes of expression. And it's in the similar context that the group Teatre Lliure emerged in Barcelona in 1976. The company was formed as a 15-member cooperative made up of actors, directors, and technicians, nominally under the leadership of the designer, director, and actor, Fabia Puigcerver, assisted by Carlota Soldevila, Luis Pascal, and Pere Planella. The group's vision was the creation of a theatre in Catalan promoting the use of the language as Puigcerver describes it, un hecho normal, a normal thing, in order to normalize that which had not previously existed. Imagining the need to invent a Catalan theatrical tradition, a decision was taken to base its repertoire on what its founders termed the solidity of the international repertoire, both classical and contemporary. All decisions and output relating to each production were to be arrived at in-house, including the play choice, set design, set building, lighting, program design, and auditorium design. Fundamental to the philosophy was the formation of a free space, a versatile area that could be reconfigured to accommodate the needs of each individual performance. And similar to the early Gate, it was decided that the company would be a fluid group of professionals in which all members could and would perform all the tasks, both on and off stage, necessary for the mounting of each production. From the beginning, although the common language would be Catalan, it was thought that the project would be best served by presenting performances of already existing works in translation. unlike the original intention, for example, of the Abbey Theatre, which promoted newly written pieces by local playwrights from the outset. The vision of Lliure was of a theatre that looked outward and abroad, mirroring the stated intention of the Gate. As artistic director Alex Rigola said in 2007, "I think of Lliure as a Catalan and a European theatre." In this regard, it's illustrative that the leading founder of the company, Puigcerver, had grown up in Poland, graduating with a degree in theatre design from the University of Warsaw. Apart from allowing audiences to develop their sense of a normalized Catalan discourse, Puigcerver and company also used scripts of foreign origin to speak to local political concerns. For this reason, and also because of the interests of Puigcerver and Pasqual, Brecht stylistically underpinned the program for the first few years of Lliure. And this is interesting in context of what Joan was talking about yesterday and really spelling out Brecht's influence in the Gate. In particular, one early Brecht production came to define the company's ethos while also providing a platform for wider political comment and engagement. In 1978, it staged a celebrated production of La Vida del Rey Eduard II de Inglaterra, a translation of Brecht's 1922 resetting of Christopher Marlowe's The Troublesome Reign and Lamentable Death of Edward II, King of England. It's hard to imagine a more politically inflected play to demonstrate the intention of a company in relation to the conversation it intended to inspire within the Catalan community. Marlowe's play foregrounded the homosexual relationship between the king and his partner Gaveston, and the playwright uses the latter's gruesome final execution as a result of court intrigue orchestrated by his enemy Mortimer to inspire meditation on the nature of kingship, court polity, and disjointed political or public discourse. Now, the attraction to socialist Brecht of such a meditation is obvious, but the mixture of atavistic violence with personal animosity and administrative power seems to have resonated for Teatre Lliure in the volatile immediate post-Franco era. This was 3 years after Franco had died. In the same year as Lliure's first production of the play, a failed coup d'etat was narrowly avoided, and its protagonist eventually came closer to success in February 1981. The years immediately preceding the first production had witnessed street violence from separatist terrorists and Marxist groups, as well as from nationalist and fascist organizations. Given Catalonia's recent experience of the vagaries of absolute and ill-wielded power, the resonance for audiences in the play, during both its original run and its subsequent revivals could not be avoided. Pasqual also made sure to draw attention to the nature of the piece as a disruptive anti-establishment performance, describing it as, quote, a type of desperate individuals howl against all posturing, end quote. A review of the 1988 Spanish language revival of Pasqual's production Madrid noted that the resonances of miscarriages of justice and illegal punishment from the time of the play's premiere were still apparent, although fading, revealing another aspect of the play that Pasqual and Lliure hoped would speak to the audiences. The reviewer in 1983 also made connections to the current unjust convictions and punishments, and despairingly suggested that what now persisted was a sense of anguish, dirt, and filth. This is a still from the Madrid production, the Spanish language production, which shows a very, very young Antonio Banderas, which I thought might be interesting. In addition to Brecht, over the years, the Teatre Lliure has also mounted high-profile productions of works by, amongst others, Shakespeare, Schiller, Buchner, Chekhov, Pirandello, Beckett, Pinter, Mamet, and Martin McDonagh. A particularly successful production was Brian Friel's Dancing as Lunacy as Dansa d'Agost, directed by Guillem Jordi Giles in 1993. Critic Laura Serra suggested that the popularity of the production seemed to rely on, quote, the scent of nostalgia, which spoke to a Catalan sense of history as much as it did.
Battery 100%.
My microphone. Now, critic Laura Serra suggested that the production seemed to rely on the scent of nostalgia, which spoke to a Catalan sense of history as much as it did to the subject matter of a disappearing Irish culture. In this, and in most cases, the transposition of each play to a Catalan setting through its translation to the Catalan language, is intended to reflect the local back to the audience in an overtly cosmopolitan manner. In this case, as in the performances of so many international authors, recast in the local language, Lliure were treading the blurred line of the local and international, suggesting that the true cosmopolitan is the product of such an engagement, and revisiting the process undertaken by the Gate in its Irish language project, which David will now go on to illuminate.
Gotcha. Thanks, Fergal. Contrary to what is often suggested in histories of Irish theatre, the early Gate was as concerned with Irish national identity as the Abbey, and explicitly asserted its wish to be accepted as a national theatre on a par with its counterpart. In the mid to early 1930s, Mary Manning, Lord Longford, and Norman Ledden all wrote essays for the Gate's house magazine, Motley, or for other periodicals, in which they suggested that the Gate was a national asset which aspired to the role of a national theatre by, quote, portraying the mind and soul of Ireland, end quote. It's clear from the content and tone of these essays that the project being undertaken at the theatre was not to embrace the modern and the international as a means of counteracting the Abbey or challenging any perceived insularity in the political milieu of the time. What was intended rather was that the Gate's outward-looking and modern methods would be seen as contributing to the whole enterprise of nation-building post-independence. Part of the Gate's concern over Irish nationalist matters was the interest shown by key figures from its early years in the Irish language. Lord Longford, the self-styled Eamon de Longford, did much to promote the language at a local political level. But most notably, there are the Irish language activities of the Gate's co-founders, Micheál Mac Liammóir and the non-Irish speaking Hilton Edwards. Prior to the founding of the Gate in Dublin, Mac Liammóir and Edwards, the boys, helped found Ireland's National Irish Language Theatre Untitled Chapter in Galway. And this occurred in August of 1928, that is 2 months before the Gate mounted its first productions in Dublin. Mac Liammóir gamely helped produce, direct, and design shows at Untitled Chapter, while also getting the Gate on its feet right up until 1931. In July of that year, he oversaw production of his Irish language translation of Bernard Shaw's Arms and the Man at Untitled Chapter, and as he puts it in his memoir, All for Hecuba, quote, that was the end of my work in the West, end quote. However, it was not the end of his work in the Irish language. In the autumn of 31, Mac Liammóir was offered and accepted the producership of Encore Dromiuchta, the Gaelic Drama League of Ireland. And between 1931 and 1942, Mac Liammóir not only allowed Encore to use the Gate Auditorium on Sunday nights, when the theatre would otherwise be dark, he was also heavily involved in the company's productions. In addition to serving as Encore's co-producer, alongside Pierce Paisley, he directed the company's productions of his own translations of works by Bernard Shaw, Eugene O'Neill, Anton Chekhov, and Sasha Guitry, as well as Irish language translations by others of important plays from across Europe and the United States. Like the Gates programming, Encore offered an eclectic fare: English, continental European, and American playwrights, as well as Irish playwrights with an uneasy or non-existent relationship with the Abbey. Encore had been producing the same heady mix even prior to the founding of the Gate, and Mac Liammóir had actually occasionally directed productions for them between 1923 and 1930. It's therefore easy to see why the boys would be interested in effectively absorbing Encore into their Gate project. After all, both Encore and the Gate were seeking to fill gaps that the Abbey was ignoring. That is, work in the Irish language and also international work that was experimental and or that would have much to say about a newly independent Ireland. During Encore's years based at the Gate, one prominent example of the company using an international play to speak to local socio-political concerns is its immensely popular production of Scapon na Classe, Tomás Ó Hainacon's translation of Molière's Les Fourberies de Scapin. This play was directed by Mac Liammóir and premiered at the Gate on 16 November 1931. Production was a standout favorite for Encore's audience members, as was proved through an audience survey. And this popularity is perhaps unsurprising, given how much this Molière play had to say to the puritanically Catholic Irish Free State. After all, it's a work in which the hero Scapin comes up with schemes to literally undermine patriarchal authority. He outwits the fathers of 2 young suitors in order to obtain a degree of sexual freedom for the young couples that he seeks to assist. Additionally, the work features, as critics have noted, quote, the first occurrence of the verb succampe in the modern sense, thus marking the de facto birth of the camp aesthetic, with its emphasis on artifice, exaggeration, and subversive representations of gender, end quote. In newly independent Ireland, sexuality was heavily policed by the Catholic Church, with assistance from the state. Note, for example, the incarceration of young women in institutions, the use of the confessional and pulpit to control the sexual behavior of young people, and even the quote-unquote supervision provided by priests at dances. As regards the queer sexuality conventionally associated with camp performance, homosexuality was not decriminalized in the Irish state till 1993. As such, the topics handled in Molière's plays were extremely pertinent to the Irish people attending Encore's production at the Gate in 1931. A second prominent example of Encore using an international play to address Irish matters is its staging of Gaisce agus Gaisceach, MacLeamore's translation of Shaw's Arms and the Man, mounted twice at the Gate during the latter half of 1931. As previously noted, this translation had originally premiered at Untitled, and as on that occasion, the play was directed by MacLeamore himself. Since Shaw was born and raised in Dublin and expressed pride in his Irish identity throughout his lifetime, it might seem odd to use a play of his as an example of international drama. However, this is not one of Shaw's 3 plays set in Ireland, nor is it one of his many English plays which prominently feature an Irish character, such as Man and Superman. It's set in Bulgaria in the wake of a war between the Bulgarians and the Serbs, and the central story involves a Swiss mercenary and a young Bulgarian woman falling in love. While it seems that there's no clear link made to Ireland at all in the play, MacLeamore and Encore knew that Shaw's script would have much to say to a newly independent Ireland. Arms and the Man is set in 1885, only 7 years after Bulgaria gained its freedom from the Ottoman Empire after 5 centuries of subjugation. Throughout the play, Shaw mocks the faux sophistication of the Bulgarian family at the heart of the play and suggests that their ineffectual aping of Viennese fashions only shows up their parochialism. By contrast, he compliments true Bulgarian culture when, for example, he praises the traditional Bulgarian outfits worn by the servants Luca and Nicola in the stage directions. Shaw is therefore implicitly calling for the Bulgarian characters to marry true Bulgarian culture to the political sophistication and genuine cosmopolitanism of the Swiss mercenary. This mirrors the Gate's own desire to show Irish people that Irish authenticity and European sophistication are not mutually exclusive. As Desmond Rush has persuasively argued, quote, MacLeamore's vision was of an Ireland at once more Gaelic and more European, more connected with the continent in spirit, and by being bilingual, having more sympathy with other languages and other cultures, end quote. The Gate's Irish language activities were not confined to the Encore productions on Sunday nights. Theatre also included Irish language and bilingual plays in its reviews, whether at Christmas, Easter, or over the summer. All of these occasional items were written in Irish or Irish and English and dealt very directly with Irish issues. And of course, the fact that these playlets were staged alongside English language translations of plays originating everywhere from England and France to China as part of these reviews once again emphasized the Gate's commitment to stressing that Gaelic pride did not preclude world citizenship. The Teatre Lliure's success in the years after its founding meant that in 1988, following a series of discussions and symposia involving local, municipal, and regional Catalan authorities, it was decided to abandon the cooperative format and create a private foundation. The intention was to expand dramatically the activities of the theatre. This expansion was achieved by the foundation being taken under the wing of the local governmental authorities. Like the Gates courting of politicians from the major political parties through social events and opening night invitations during its early decades, and its decision to start taking an Irish government subsidy from 1972, the Teatre Lliure was accused of having its creative control diluted by the interests of the state and of being part of a wider problem familiar to us in Ireland of funding going to a couple of approved institutions, thereby causing hardship to competing independent theatre groups. The main such approved group was, of course, the National Theatre of Catalonia, which opened in 1996 under the direction of actor Josep Maria Flotats. The founding of this new organization consolidated Teatre Lliure's position as an alternative national theatre, despite its government subsidy. The relationship between the National Theatre of Catalonia and the Teatre Lliure can be compared to that which persists between Ireland's National Theatre, the Abbey, and the Gate. Just as the Abbey is more associated with plays by Irish playwrights and the Gate with international fare, the National Theatre of Catalonia's program is more heavily composed of Catalan writers than its counterpart, the Teatre Lliure. Now, this crude contrasting of these Irish and Catalan theatres is reductive and ultimately misleading. After all, the Gate has introduced important Irish playwrights to the world, such as Dennis Johnston, Mary Manning, Christine Longford, Maura Laverty, Brian Friel, and of course, MacLeamore. Furthermore, the 7 plays written originally in Irish, which were staged by Encore Dromaíochta, during its years based at the Gate are important, unjustly neglected, and influential works, including one which may have influenced The Guest of the Nation by Frank O'Connor. Likewise, the Abbey has produced numerous international classics since its founding. Consider Lady Gregory's translations of Molière, or even Catalan director Calixto Vieto's famous or infamous challenging production of Valet Inclán's The Barbaric Comedies at the Abbey in 2000. Along similar lines, the Teatre Lliure has regularly produced Catalan writers, going right back to its premiere production, which was written by co-founder Luis Pascula. And the National Theatre of Catalonia actually opened with a production of Tony Kushner's Angels in America and has produced versions of international classics by the likes of Shakespeare, Chekhov, and Shaw throughout its existence. However, the accusation still lingers that these alternative national theatres are somehow less nationalist than the official national theatres that they are frequently compared to due to their interest in international classics. As this paper has hopefully shown, translated works produced at the Teatre Lliure and the Gate Theatre were speaking directly to contemporary political realities in Catalonia and Ireland, respectively. They were in no way distracting local people from nationalist concerns. What's more, these organizations were demonstrating through theater making in a minority language that true cosmopolitanism consists of deep engagement with one's very specific local culture and with ideas, trends, and languages from beyond one's borders. Intercultural exchange of this kind somehow manages to simultaneously strengthen a local culture's sense of its own uniqueness while also helping to illuminate the important connections that all human beings have in common. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both Fergal and David, for that. We're going to move on to our second speaker now, who I have the great pleasure to introduce, and that is Professor Marguérite Corporaal, who is full professor in Irish literature in transnational contexts at Radboud University. Corporaal was recently awarded a VICI grant by NWO for her project Redefining the Region, the Transnational Dimensions of Local Colour. Furthermore, Corporaal is PI of Heritages of Hunger, Societal Reflections on Past European Famines in Education, Commemoration and Musealization, which is funded as part of the NWA programme launched by NWO and the Dutch government. Among Corporaal's recent international publications are Relocated Memories of the Great Famine in Irish and Diaspora Fiction, 1847 to 70, with Syracuse, The Great Irish Famine and Social Class, co-edited, and that came out with Peter Lang. The Great Irish Famine, Visual and Material Culture, with Liverpool University Press, and Irish Studies and the Dynamics of Memory, that was published with Peter Lang. The title of her paper today is Cosmopolitan Theatre and Frisian Identity Construction. So I'll pass over to you now, Marguérite. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ian, for the generous introduction. All right, let's get started. The Dublin Gay Theatre has been acknowledged as a cosmopolitan theatre that simultaneously helped to construct and cement Irish identities. Scholarship by, amongst others, Ruud van den Beuken, David Clare, Nicola Morris, has demonstrated that from the start, the Gate engaged with international poetics, dramaturgical techniques, and repertoire, and also targeted international audiences. Theatres elsewhere in Europe play or played similar roles in combining international repertoire with plays which stage national or regional pastoral issues. And one such theatre which, like the Gate, furthermore invested in emancipating marginal identities and promoting a minority language is the Frisian Teatre. Officially established in 1965 in Lliure, cultural capital of Europe in 2018, Teatre has played a prominent role in shaping regional identities through engagements with international repertoire, as well as in providing a platform to plays in the Frisian language, following the so-called Knuppelvrede campaign of 1951, which stimulated Frisian as a cultural language. The history of this Frisian theatre goes back to the foundation of the Frieske Toneelstifting in 1965, which then acquired the official name Teatre in 1969. Teatre became highly successful in the 1970s under the directorship of Piet van der Zee, and in 1985, when Tom van der Goot was artistic director, the theatre finally attained national recognition and funding. Before the outbreak of COVID-19, Teatre would stage over 500 performances per year in Frisian and in other languages, both at its main venue in Lliure, but also at local venues and schools in and beyond Friesland. Now, this paper will discuss theatre in comparison to the Gate in 3 respects. First, this presentation will address theatre's politics in offering professional plays in the local language of the people. Second, this paper will explore theatre's Frisian adaptations of international plays. And third, and finally, this talk will discuss the construction of Frisian identities in relation to globalization and marginal identities in original plays written for and produced by theatre. And these include Romke Touring's play Het Huis Moet Leeg from 2004. And if I would translate it, it would actually be Clear the House. And Hummus and Haring's community art project Eritrea Town from 2018. Like Irish, Frisian is an officially recognized living national language. It is primarily spoken in the northwestern region of Friesland, where it is the mother tongue of approximately 50% of today's population. Moreover, Frisian is taught as a mandatory subject in primary schools in the province, and children are to achieve a basic level of proficiency in the language, according to the Taalplan Friesk. 3 secondary schools in Friesland offer teaching in Dutch, Frisian, and English, and the Frisian campus of University of Groningen offers a BA and MA program in Frisian studies as part of a specialization in minorities and multilingualism. Since the 19th century, Frisian has been frequently used as the language of amateur theatre productions as well, spurred on by Douwe Kalma's Jong Frieske Beweging, which aimed to promote drama in Frisian through the Jong Friesk Toneel, established in 1920. The foundation of Boeren van Frieske Toneelselskappen in Friesland in 1918 was a major step in the formation of 2 semi-professional theatre companies in the early 1930s. These were Barend van der Veen's Leids Fries Toneel and J.P. Wiersma's Nijfries Toneel. Jongpraters between 1945 and 65 became an important regional theatre company in promoting the use of Frisian as a language of the stage, at a time when the emancipation of the minority language was high on the political agenda. Significantly, the foundation of the Frieske Toneelstifting in 1965, the company which, as I explained, was later to acquire the name Teatre, marked the first regional professional theatre. And in Speaking in Tongues, Languages at Play in the Theatre, Marvin Carlson argues that the function of speech as an instrument of cultural control has encouraged theatres, especially those in post-colonial societies, to stage drama in marginalized indigenous languages. In their early histories, the Gate and Theatre share a concern with the promotion of indigenous languages, which was moreover combined with a cosmopolitan outlook. Both theatres would bring translations of internationally renowned avant-garde drama into an indigenous minority language to the stage. Hilton Atwood's and Mihoul MacLearmore's opening night at the Peacock on the 14th of October 1928 involved the stage production of Henrik Ibsen's Peer Gynt in Irish. Moreover, as Fergal, Whelan and David Clare demonstrate in a forthcoming chapter, the Gate became a playhouse where original theatre in Irish, as well as translations of plays by Bernard Shaw, Eugene O'Neill and William Shakespeare, were staged when MacLearmore, as producer of Uncomfort Drama Orta, offered the Gaelic Drama League of Ireland the use of the Gate Auditorium on Sunday nights between 1931 and 1942. Now, intriguingly, the roots of theatre lie in a 1963 performance of a Frisian translation of Jean-Paul Sartre's La Putain Respectueuse, and the Frisian translation was made by Anne Watman. This production, Een Slet van $10, had been initiated by Frieske Nationaal Boen and was such a success that it was followed by a stage production of John Osborne's Look Back in Anger in Frisian. In subsequent decades, theatre staged original plays in the Frisian language, such as Pieter Terpstra's De Megerherberg from 1971, Arjen Terpstra's Ik ben de Jochter from 1979, and more recently Romke Touring's Baardeloon from 2002, a prize-winning production that addressed the decline of cattle trading in Friesland. So really a topic you could say of local concern. At the same time, Theatre has regularly produced international repertoire in Frisian translation. such as Euripides' Medea, that actually was brought to the stage in Frisian in 2000 and was actually translation by Bauke Oldenhof, who's done actually quite a lot of work for Teatre. A 1998 production of Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman, here called De Deer van een Handelsreiziger, and a 1999 production of Ibsen's Peer Gynt in the local dialect of the Wadden island of Terschelling, where the performance took place, very close to the beach. At the same time, while Teatre has invested in theatre productions in the Frisian language, especially over the past 20 years, it has presented itself as an inherently multilingual theatre, which also stages productions in Dutch and other languages. In a 2001 interview with newspaper Trouw of 12 December of that year, artistic director of the time, Josti, stated that the choice of language continues to be a point of reflection and discussion at Teatre. While most productions are in Frisian, others are in Dutch and incorporate other local dialects as well. Furthermore, this newspaper article reports that back in 2001, Teatre collaborated with 40 other European companies investing in theatre in local minority languages as part of the Offspring network, through which these companies could exchange play scripts, experiences, and actors. At present, Teatre's mission statement is that of serving as a unique multilingual theatre, and their website is actually in Frisian and in Dutch. If I quote from their Frisian website, they say they are het enige meertalige theaterselschap van Nederland. While the theatre caters for Friesland's local population, for more than half of whom Frisian is a mother tongue, it also says that Us tweede Rijkstaal, de Memmetaal, in our present time, Teatre's ambition is a much wider reach. As they state, they are currently involved in a verboen met oren Europese gezelschappen die in een meertalige context werken. If I translate it, a European network of theatre companies working in multilingual contexts. And this significance of multilingualism in Teatre's current policies is very much mirrored by one of its most recent productions, which was actually created as part of Lliure being the cultural capital of Europe. And this is Eritrea Town from 2018. This short series of plays was incorporated in a community art project of the same name, organized by a company called Hummus and Haring, and aimed to bring together the local people of the Frisian capital Leeuwarden with the 350 Eritrean refugees that came to the area between 2015 and 2018. The series of theatrical performances took place outside, in the Oosterstraat, in the heart of the city of Leeuwarden, in local shops and in the city's Lutheran church, and consisted of a dump show enactment of situations encountered by the refugees, as well as narrations by locals and the immigrants in Frisian, in Dutch, in English, and in Tigrinya. This specific production endorses Maddy Janssens and Chris Stew's claim that embracing cosmopolitanism and deciding to use a local language, and this is also the point that actually Fergal just made, are not in conflict with one another. Theatres like Teatre and The Gate, which from its incipient stage plays in both Irish and English, may at first glance seem merely concerned with the promotion of national and local minority languages. However, often this investment in marginalized languages in bilingual context facilitates a platform for more inclusiveness towards other minority languages and cultures. Just like Teatre, which from the onset gave a stage to new local playwrights, The Gate significantly furthered the careers of hitherto unknown generation of dramatists. We all know the names: Dennis Johnson, David Sears, Robert Collis, Mary Manning. Their plays, such as The Old Lady Says No and Used to Season, clearly engage with Ireland's post-colonial identity. However, The Gate has from the start also stressed its cosmopolitan outlook, as especially Ruud van den Beuken also emphasizes in his recent monograph. Edward McLearmont's claim in the Dublin Gate Theatre Studio from 1928 that it is essential that Dublin should see the work of other writers and other countries, if only in order to further her understanding and appreciation of her own, is actually a case in point. Van den Beuken calls this the double vision of national and international orientation that the Gate founders expressed from the start. Now, we may find a similar double orientation in the artistic politics of Teatre. As we saw, Teatre has a long-standing tradition in staging works by Frisian dramatists, as well as plays of international acclaim. In fact, we may find evidence of this simultaneous focus on the local and the global, and their interconnections in two examples I wish to present to you. The first is Trouw's interview with Jos T from December 2001, and the second is T's valedictory stage production for Teatre in 2003, called Koning Lear. And obviously, this is a Frisian translation of King Lear by Shakespeare. It was again a translation by Bouke Oldenhoff. It was directed by Jos T himself, and it featured the Frisian stand-up comedian and actor, the late Rien Schratema, in the role of the tragic king. Now, in the 2001 interview with Trouw, Jos T discusses his approach as artistic director since 1994, stating that Teatre should value its regional orientation and stage issues and settings that its main audience, the people from Friesland, are familiar and concerned with. As such, he feels Teatre should not shy away from popular theatre forms, but above all, its repertoire should reflect the societal context of the audience. This means that, according to T, Teatre could address the issues faced by rural communities, but also feelings of estrangement and resistance to the decline of community feeling, as well as the reputation of the Frisian language and culture. He calls it in Dutch gevoelens van vervreemding, verzet tegen de afkoop van de gemeenschapszin of het imago van het Fries. Teatre should address these regional issues and should evoke regionally recognizable settings, such as the village pub, the farmstead, or the country fields, T suggests here. And what he argues here very much fits in with the kind of productions he directed for Teatre. For example, the very costly theatrical spectacle Abe, about Friesland's most legendary soccer player Abe Lenstra, who brought his team to victory in 1951. And the performance consisted of a recreation of the victorious match combined with the enactment of scenes from Lenstra's life, and was staged at the Abe Lenstra's football stadium in Heerenveen from 11th to 16th September 1995. At the same time, T observes in the interview, Teatre should confront its audiences with changes of the region, such as what he calls the komst van asielzoekers, the arrival of asylum seekers. This remark is interesting because T intimates that Teatre, as a locally based theatre, should confront the intersections of regionalism and globalization. Furthermore, T makes clear that the Frisian focus can also be brought out in Teatre staging of international repertoire. And in the interview, he actually talks about Shakespeare's Hamlet. As such, he envisages intersections between local and international themes through the production also of foreign drama. Now, these intersections are evident from one of the most successful theatre productions ever, Koning Lear. Staged in the Fries Paardencentrum, the Frisian Horse Center in Drachten, this Frisian language production of Shakespeare's play stages the king's tragic downfall against the background of what you can actually see here on this slide, a very huge wheel. It's actually called Chiel in Frisian, which symbolizes, as was written in the press, the Reed van Fortune, the wheel of fortune. That is so often referenced by the characters in the play. And in the original play, of course, it's Edmund who brings this up quite a lot. This motif of the wheel significantly recurs when the mentally deranged Lear, as a naked forked animal, wanders around on the fields, while the fool, played by Joop Wittemans, holds up the only wheel that is left of the two carriages that once formed the king's entourage and train, as if it were a broken umbrella. And you can see it actually on the second image here on the slide. And what he actually says is in Frisian, "Deze nacht had geen begrutschen, maar de wieze leeuw na het net en maar de gekkenek net. Wat in hoes had om sine holle in te stekken, die had de beste pet." And this basically, it says, this night is basically a pitiless, merciless, and it's not good for the wise people. It's not good for the I could say the deranged people. And if you have something to cover your head with, well, then you're better off than anybody else. Now, the show's impressiveness was enhanced by the involvement of 50 Frisian horses. Oops. In the dramatic enactment. It is interesting that the play makes use of this very local breed of horses to convey issues of authority and loss of power in the play. At the beginning of the play, Koning Lliure enters the stage in a cart drawn by 8 horses, followed by his train, and he sits high up on the carriage seat. Later on in the play, he gradually loses his entourage till he has only one cartwheel left. The play thus translates the setting into one that Frisian audiences are familiar with: horse driving and issues of land. Furthermore, Bouke Oldenhoff has changed the names of almost all the characters from English ones into ancient Frisian ones. For example, Edgar is named Sibrand, Gloucester is now called Rjoestringen, and Cordelia is called Hartbrecht, a name that resonates with the Frisian words for broken heart. By choosing these Frisian names, Oldenhoff appears to hark back to pre-Christian times when Friesland was ruled by tribes with kings of their own. These pasts have been mediated for the stage in the Frisian history plays in the past as well, but there's actually other plays by Douwe Kalma, and I think that's an interesting connection we see, because Douwe Kalma actually wrote plays like Koning Alt-Gillis in 1920, and Kalma himself, he was actually a teacher of English, also translated all Shakespeare's history plays in Frisian in 1965, and made a translation of King Lear in 1969. So what you can see is that he is actually embedding himself in a long-standing tradition about drama, about kings, and that it go back into Frisian history as well. Now, this impression that the play resonates with the histories of Frisian kings is reinforced by a 2004 interview by Pieter Verhoef with lead actor Riens Gratema, in which he drew analogies between the early histories of the British Isles and Friesland's pagan past, stating that the play could have taken place in Friesland as well. Gratema sees parallels between the landscape in Friesland on the one hand and Scotland and England on the other. He says in Frisian, "Het hebt toch een soort van Engeland en Scotland." He argues that in all these localities, the people have always felt a similar strong connection to the soil. Hetzelfde verbondens maai de groen. Gratema thus implies that audiences in Friesland can easily relate to Shakespeare's international play, its settings and its issues. Both Ireland and the District of Friesland have experienced a strong influx of Syrian and African refugees over the past years. And at both the Gate and Teatre, we can see this reflected in recent stage productions. The final season of the Gate, prior to the COVID crisis, saw a version of Shakespeare's Hamlet directed by South African Yael Faber at the Gate, which had cast Irish-Ethiopian actress Ruth Negga in the lead role. And his choice for casting a Black actress as the main protagonist, as the foil to a Claudius dressed in military suits, accentuated hierarchies and inequalities of power, not only in relation, but also in connection to ethnicity. The fact that Corporaal chose to tour this specific production in New York City after the Dublin season, a context known, of course, for ethnic diversity, suggests that the Gate also today seeks to contribute to discussions about race beyond Ireland. Now, over the past 2 decades, Teatre has also foregrounded this awareness of a changing region with increased cultural diversity in her theatre programs. Romke Touring's very successful play, Het Roers Mat Leeg, premiered on the 25th of November 2004 and went into reprise in June 2007, is an example of a play which engages with the concept of the outsider to the region. Actress Ali Bruinsma plays a middle-aged woman who recently lost her mother, has to clear the house of her mother. She moved house, but finds herself estranged from her new Frisian local community, even if she tries to learn the language. The struggle in finding her place parallels that of the asylum seekers at the local centre, who also experience displacement. And as such, this production explored the tensions between local communities and newcomers. Now, the previously discussed Eritrea town also confronts the complexities of integration. The theatrical pieces or sketches directed by Janneke de Haan expose the sense of alienation of the refugees. A lost young Eritrean refugee carrying a lot of luggage and holding a map is ignored by passers-by when he asks for their assistance. The passers-by suggest a diverse cultural population, for they consist, among others, of a drunkard, a dancer, and a cowboy. Yet despite this diversity among the locals, they have no concern for the refugee other, trying to find his directions and place in his host society. Now, during the performance, the audience watches the scene from space inside while the enactment takes place outside, thereby enhancing the dichotomy between in and outsiders that the play also criticizes. A final tableau takes place in the Evangelical Lutheran Church. The audience are placed on the balcony and they look down on two big round tables. You can actually see it here on the slide. The ensuing scene stresses the symbolical role of circles as signs of equality in Eritrean culture, as also explained already in the first theatrical sketch by a Dutch speaker. As the scene evolves, the tables come to stand for the opportunities for connection between the local Frisian people and the Eritreans. And dance and traditional Eritrean music play an important role in conveying this sense of community and understanding. As such, these theatrical impressions explicitly stress the urgency of reaching out to immigrants in regional communities. Eritrea Town was one of the closing productions of Leeuwarden's year as a cultural capital. And I want to argue that this European context is very significant for understanding the dynamics of Teatre as a theatre, originally concerned with the emancipation of marginalized local identities. As we have seen, we can draw many analogies between the Gate and Teatre as theatres, which have initially foregrounded and helped to construct indigenous, long-repressed cultural traditions, languages, and legacies. And at the same time, from the start, both theatres have actively sought to produce international repertoire and to embed regional and national issues in broader transnational context of politics and poetic aesthetics. What may we learn from the positioning and development of these theatres about emancipation and drama and community involvement? Moreover, can we compare the Gate and Teatre with similar European theatres in relation to issues of identity construction, use of minority languages, transnational exchange, representations of globalization, and the current turn towards audience engagement that we find in theatre studies? These are very interesting questions to put on the agenda for a broader comprehension of theatre's role at various cultural intersections. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you so much, Marguérite, for that as well. An amazing panel in itself, I think, performing exactly what you were talking about. All of the speakers in that, it was a truly kind of cosmopolitan panel in a sense, in its emphasis on both the local and the international, and making those connections between the two. We went a little bit over time, but we still have time for questions. So I see there's lots of things coming up in the chat. So if I can, first of all, wow, okay, so there's a lot here. I might, to be honest, maybe Martin, if you want to, if you're there, if you want to actually read out your own comment, perhaps, would that be okay? Are you there, Martin?
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
I am. Sorry for my rather long and involved comment. It was just I really enjoyed that presentation on Spanish theatre and local and national cosmopolitanism, etc. Particularly the analysis they did of Scapin and of Arms and the Man. And thank you so much for that. I was just observing that when I looked at it, the Spanish plays that stuck out were these by Martina Sierra and Quinteros, and I just I'm interested in whether they come up have come up in discussion of the Gate more broadly. And I just made a comment, and people can read it around where they came from and what they were about. So I was just interested in whether there was any resonance with those playwrights or any other references to them in the rest of the work.
Well, I suppose we have to talk about the fact that Mick Leamore has that kind of love-hate relationship with Spain and with Spanish. You know, as he wrote to Secretary Patricia Turner, Spain to me means doom. And that dates back to 1914 with an unfortunate situation he had, probably involving sexual assault from an older male. And so therefore, there is this curious relationship he has. He claims to have Spanish roots, which Nick Lamar's genealogist and I have found is not probably true. But he does have Irish blood, so that was an unusual discovery. But I suppose that what is important to note is that, yes, there is something going on there with his deep interest in Spain. So much work would need to be done I think, looking at those encore productions and McLeomore's involvement in them. But yeah, those Spanish ones are very exciting. I don't know if Fergal has something he wants to say about that.
Not really. You've said it all, David, in relation to his odd relationship with Spain. I'm particularly thinking of that sort of travelogue he did in Irish. Is it in Kilmalala Shaka? I think where they do go away, and he does go away, and he's talking lovely about Seville and the rest of it, and in a very sort of generic, romantic way, but also there's a dark side too. So in a way, I wouldn't overly emphasize his choice of those particular playwrights, other than that they were current and they were popular at the time as international playwrights. The fact is that the fact that they're international is as much an issue and is as important as anything else, rather than having any particular Spanish bent. They were interesting playwrights because they're forgotten playwrights now, but they were popular at the time, and really that's all I have to think about it. The other thing I do think is that I think they might have come up in Untitled Chapter as well, certainly over the next 20 years, either one or other of them. So it's just a case of taking what was there.
Great. We have another question here from Rude, which I'll try to, it's explained very well here in his comment, but just essentially he if I direct it to yourself, Marguérite, but I think it could also relate to the other paper as well, where he's quoting Lauren Kruger, and he's saying, she argues that there are persistent contradictions between apparent audience and underrepresented counter publics. Considering the limited visibility of Frisian identities in the Netherlands more generally, I was wondering how you would interpret the effects of Teatre's politics on Frisian and or Dutch audiences. To what extent are they catering for or even creating counter publics? I think this question around audiences is hugely important. So maybe if you could come back to us on that, Marguérite, first of all.
Yeah, I'll try. I really like your suggestion, Ruud. And also, I think this is definitely something worth exploring in more details. If we talk about the languages of the stage, I think this is like a crucial issue. I have the feeling when you look at the repertoire over the decades that there is a more move towards multilingualism now than there has ever been before. And that initially the focus was very much on Frisian, to use Frisian as a language, also to target audiences in the local area of Friesland. But that has changed a lot because they collaborate, for example, with the Oerol Festival, which is a big theatre festival on Terschelling, which takes place annually. And if you basically have production staged there, you can of course use like a local dialect, as they do with the Peer Gynt production. But also you have to cater for audiences who are not sort of mastering the language. And I know that they work a lot also with subtitles on the stage in Dutch, so people can understand that the Dutch translation, if there's Frisian or another dialect is being used. But I have the feeling that they really sort of try to reach out as well to the audiences elsewhere, and that it's also, they place themselves, I think, more frequently now also as a Dutch theatre, and also they say, yeah, we are the only Dutch multilingual theatre. I'm not entirely sure whether this still holds, if I'm honest, but it's an interesting suggestion they make. And I think the production of Eritrea Towns shows that other languages.
You froze on us there, Marguérite.
Way, and especially because it's a community art-based project, basically people could go into the streets, right? And they could attend the performance, and they could combine it with eating food in Eritrean style, and they could go into shops and see Eritrean artifacts, for example. You make it very low profile, and you cannot anticipate what kind of audience you're expecting. And it was part of the European capital project of Lliure, which meant that many people from outside the region would actually come. And even people internationally would travel to Lliure for that. So I think your suggestion is important. There are many more, maybe not initially targeted audiences who would also attend the performance here. And it may also explain the turn to the multilingual, that's not just part of raising issues about refugees, but it also could play an important role in linking up to wider audiences as well.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating. I mean, I think there's kind of a visual thing for me when I go to Irish language performance. I think there's this issue around surtitles kind of brings all of those issues to the fore sometimes, where there's kind of the people who are automatically feeling outside by having to look at the surtitles and those who are kind of don't have to look at them as well, and creates those boundaries. And obviously there's issues around naturalism and authenticity, and then the experimentalism that you've all connected, or artificiality that David talked about in relation to language as well, and minority languages, embracing that minority position. So much here. If we'll indulge me, we might just go on just a little bit longer, just for a minute or two, and then we'll wrap things up. But I just have another question here from Grace, where she says, fantastic papers. Thank you so much for Dr. Corporaal as well. The mention of inclusion and exclusion through minority languages reminded me of, I'm going to butcher these as well, Lagland's production, Zuger Leach, which shows the DSM ramp from the point of view of the children from the working class community in Sittard. So you obviously know what she's talking about here. Perhaps that could be an interesting window into other theatres that are working with dialects and regional languages in the Netherlands.
Yeah, I totally agree, Grace. And you really talk about a play in the Limburg dialect, or maybe it's almost a language. I think that could be a discussion of its own. I think definitely the drama that comes from the area where you grew up is very important to consider as well, especially since the Limburg area is really making a claim for acknowledgement of its own histories and cultures and dialects, especially since, well, you could say, the past 2 decades. So it's a really good point.
We'll just end on Siobhan O'Gorman's question here, which kind of relates a little bit to my own, I guess, there earlier with the idea of surtitles somewhat, but it's to do with scenography. So Siobhan says, if you have any thoughts on the role of scenography in making works in minority languages more understandable to wider audiences. So obviously all of you have looked at how essentially these from Brecht with the Catalan example to Molière, I guess, with Encore Dramiechte, to this very theatricalized production of Kenning Lliure as well, where we had these very theatricalized rather than anything to do with naturalism happening. So what about scenography? What do we think there? Maybe if I ask David and Fergal first, and then I'll come back to you, Marguérite.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. In a way, you can see that attempts are made, and I'm thinking particularly of the production of Untitled that was done a couple of years ago, which used quite a lot of masks and outsized masks and a lot of movement. In a way, I think although it was a very innovative and spectacular performance, quite part of the reason it was done was to make sure that the audience was actually getting what was happening, and more or less was accepting a certain amount of misunderstanding or lack of understanding from an audience, which is quite interesting. So it's pushing further what was intended in the original play. Although the original play itself, of course, was very much a Brechtian inspired montage. But I think you're right in some sort of a way. I mean, I know just from a personal feeling, there is a danger sometimes that you might get overdone in the visuals, because you imagine that the audience aren't going to understand any of the language, and the language becomes relegated all the way through. But certainly you can see that there is an effort there to at least, at the very least, enhance the visual rather than just rely on what you know is going to be problematic, and the old problematic, the old digital or the old analog response of just putting the subtitles, which, as you point out, Ian, does tend to get in the way. David, I'm not sure what you would want to say about that.
Yeah, not much more. Just to say that, yeah, you could see from the stills that Martin Hessian included in this paper that there was an emphasis on the visual played up, so that I think probably to meet folks that were maybe struggling with the language, and whether those designs were by McLean or himself or Orson Welles, as we heard, there is that emphasis on the visual, making sure that that's solid. But of course, that's a value of the Gates generally. And in fact, in many ways, I feel like that's why the theater gets ignored a lot, because it has that emphasis on those aspects of theater making, and maybe sometimes more than the literary. And histories of Irish theater tend to focus arguably too much on the literary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Marguérite, do you want to address that as well?
Yeah, I can say a bit more the Lliure production. I think you could see it from the pictures I put on the slide. It's a very visual production. It's a big space, and it translates, I think, very much, you could say, the main anxieties of the character and the, well, basically the issues of fate and tragic downfall with the wheel. I think it's very visualized this way. But also the horses had a prominent role in the storm scene in the play, where he loses his mind. Then all of a sudden, all the Frisian horses are let loose on this very huge kind of stage that you have. They keep running around, and he's sort of in the midst of all these horses, feeling completely disoriented. And I think it's a very visually expressive way of showing how he completely lost his rationality in that specific scene. And what is interesting is that we also have two footbridges on the stage, and that's where usually you find the two daughters, the two evil daughters represented, and they're sort of broken. They're not connected as a footbridge, but they're sort of like half footbridges that are sort of hanging over the stage, and it's almost like the doom hanging over King Lear, but also the kind of power they have over him. And I think, and the lack of connection they make to him. So yeah, to me that's a very expressive way, I think, of showing what you can do in terms of visuals, what you may not be able always to convey in language. So yeah,
I guess there's so much here, but obviously King Lear has all these issues around division of land, etc. as well. So I presume that kind of fed into the production as well. To summarize a little bit of what's been going on in the chat before we end, I guess Kasia brought up maybe that we could be maybe a little bit more nuanced about understand, maybe just engage audiences initially and how that kind of works. And then Siobhan again has reminded us, I guess, how sometimes scenography, like in productions of those who've been more familiar with Moonfish productions, where the scenography itself actually, I guess, also has really led to or helped in relation to that engagement and understanding as well. I don't have a time to summarize everything that's going on here in the comments, because there's a wonderful chat happening because of the amazing, stimulating papers that we had. I have a load of selfish questions of my own about Corporaal and how it ended up in the Abbey with the pantomimes, and then how they actually, changed things again. Maybe it was a regressive step in terms of some of this experimentalism or not. But we have to sadly end it here because we have another panel coming up, and we do need to give people a break from screens for a little bit. All I can do is just to thank you all so much for such a great panel, and maybe just encourage people. The sad thing that we don't have is the kind of coffee afterwards where we can ask our informal questions, but maybe if people want to contact people by email or anything like that, I'm sure our speakers would be probably happy to, I'm speaking on your behalf now, but would be happy to take more questions for such a stimulating topic. And thank you so much. So virtual claps all around for that panel, and I shall leave you all now. We shall return now again at 11:30 for our next panel. Thank you so much, everybody, and see you soon.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, everyone.
Nice. Thank you.
thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.